So my name is Justin Webster. I'm going to spend the next hour 15 or so going through integration, so the SolidWorks integration with Enterprise PDM. Really, this is a focus for the users. There's a few tips maybe for administrators as well to help in educating your users, or if you're a SolidWorks user with Enterprise PDM today, hopefully you can pick up some tips that'll make you do your job a little bit better, or be a little bit more efficient, or maybe just understand the workings of the tool a little bit more. So really what I'm going to do is go through some basics, and then so there'll be some slides, and then I'll be bouncing back and forth between SolidWorks, EPDM, and the presentation itself. So any questions you have, just shout them out, and then we'll reserve a little bit of time at the end if you want to ask me some questions. I'll hang around for a little at the end as well. So I'll try to get you out of here for lunchtime. So here's some of the things we're going to be going over, just some basics on EPDM, some terms. Maybe you're just brand new to EPDM, or maybe your company has just invested in it, so you're not even been trained yet. So I want to give you a little bit of basic foundation first, and then we'll get into the integration itself, and then just some challenges, because PDM is not something that necessarily, if you're a new user, is something that it's not exactly obvious what to do. And so what I want to do is give you some tips so you can avoid some pitfalls that can affect you as you use the system for the months and years ahead. So just a little bit of my background. I work for an implementation company, and so primarily what we do is implement EPDM for companies. So we do a lot of support and training and services for implementation. And so we've trained lots of people. We support lots of customers. And one of the challenges is going into companies, 6 months, a year after an implementation, and seeing maybe some basic things that were missed during the training that we should have done a better job at reinforcing. And so part of the reason why I built this session is really originally was a training session to help reinforce some of the topics that we wanted to get across during the training classes. So just some basic terms. First of all, just a show of hands, how many people here have used EPDM? Okay. Administrators, we have any of those? Okay. So some of these terms might be hopefully things that you already know. In some cases, if you're brand new, maybe they're not. So just some terms that we'll be using throughout the presentation. We'll make sure to just give everybody a fundamental understanding of. The first one being a version. And a version, for those who are users of EPDM, or maybe just brand new, essentially the PDM system is there to manage the history of the documentation. And so you have something like a CAD file or even something like a Word document. It's there to collect your changes, and when you make a change and put it into the system, when you grab the file and bring it out and work on it, and when you put it back, all these iterations are called versions. The system tracks it for you, as well as a history and comments and everything else that you'd make during your change to that particular file. So a version is really something you can't control. You can't change it. It's going to collect the version every time you take the file out, work on it, and put it back. The command to get a version from the vault are the next two lines here. So when I say get, and there's a specific command in EPDM, which I'll show you, that get is basically a command to say, go to the vault, to the server, and bring it to me. Now initially, it sometimes could be confusing. If you're working on a file, the latest version generally is the one you're working on. So when you say get latest version, that's a command that tells it go get the latest from the vault, not from your own PC. So that get is a special command to say go to the vault and get me the file. And initially we see that mistake by SolidWorks users. They tend to think that if they're working on the file, then they have the latest. But that specific command is really to tell the server to go get me the latest. So and we'll get into where that's important in a little bit. The process for working on the files is if you want to take ownership of a file to do some work, it's called a checkout. When you're done working on something, you do a check-in. And for folks here that maybe know work group, it's a little bit different meaning from work group EPDM to Enterprise PDM. So essentially, you're checking it out, you're taking ownership, you're showing the world that you have that file. Only one person can have the file checked out at a time, and when you're done, you check it back into the vault. That process of checking it out, making a change, checking it in, is what creates the version. And then the versions stack up. As you see in this little picture here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, they count up from the bottom. They don't reset. And then every time a file is released, you can stamp it with a revision. So the version and the revision are two different things. Versions are things you can't control the order. Revisions, you control the scheme as a company, whether you want it A, B, C, or 1, 2, 3, or minor or major revisions, that kind of thing. To release a file, it's something called a change state. For those who maybe are users of EPDM, but maybe are not too familiar with the administration of it, there are flow charts that are built into the system, and your file moves along that flow chart. And each stage in the chart is called a state. And to move it from one state to the next, that's the change state. So for some of you who have been maybe releasing drawings and you hit that change state, the change state is, the button is basically tied to a workflow behind the scenes. So if you've not been explained that, there are states, and that's why the change state term is there. And then finally, the data card is essentially a place where the information is collected about the file. So its part number, its description, it's created by, and things like that are all stored in the data card so that you can search on that, and then it can also be then tied to the SolidWorks properties. So these are some fundamentals in a really basic understanding of the system if you're new to the Vault. Maybe you haven't had training yet. So the first thing I'll get into is the integration interface. So, and the reason this may seem for the users, this is somewhat, very remedial in a way. But what we find is that SolidWorks users, day to day, they don't really want to worry themselves with PDM. They want to design something. So their job is not to see who can check in the most files. Their job is to design product. And so sometimes you can get so bogged down in your menus, you don't really look around. And we have seen instances of entire user groups inside a company not really even knowing that there is a SolidWorks integration, even though they're using it all the time. So one of the things that you really should get used to if you're not already, if you're using EPDM and SolidWorks, is this whole integration menu. Now, in most cases, we see it in the task pane. The task pane, there's a few other things over there as well. Design library, file explorer. There is some appearance, texture kind of things over there. In 2013, you can select, I think it's a forum, so you can go to SolidWorks forum. So there's little tabs along the right side of your SolidWorks screen. And when you install the integration adds that tab. And you have various things in there. You have a toolbar. You have some status icons, which I'll go over. Essentially, you're looking for this icon embedded into the right task pane. Some people, it may be collapsed and you've never opened it. You should open it and take a look around at it because there's a lot of information in there, and I'm going to go over what some of the different icons mean and what to look for as you're working on the designs. We'll also go through the Enterprise PDM menu that's in here and some additional tips for adding things like mouse gestures and stuff like that. So fundamentally, there's the most common pieces or the most common operations you're going to need to execute as a SolidWorks EPDM user as part of the toolbar. And I'm not going to go through each one of these different things, but some of the highlights are the getting the version, latest version, and checking it out. And remember, the get version is a command to go to the Vault and say, bring me a particular file and bring it local. Well, in this case, local means in your SolidWorks session. So if, let's say, you have a design and you have Rev B of a part in your design and you want to go get a particular older version of the file to see what it looks like, within SolidWorks and within this task pane, you can go get me Rev A, and it will show you what Rev A looks like in your current assembly, which is one of the most powerful things that PDM can bring, but we do see a lot of people forget that that's possible. And we've seen users go through very troubling scenarios to try to reproduce something that they built some time ago, not realizing that the command's been there the whole time. So the history is being stored. It's stored for your access. And that's one of the icons that you're going to select to get that. The check-in and check-out are available in here as well in some other places. And the change state is here as well to, let's say, release a file or put a file under change, or up the rev of a drawing, things like that. That's what the change state will do. So before I get into this, I'm going to just take you into SolidWorks. So this is SolidWorks. So within SolidWorks, I have a integration over here on the right. This is the task pane. And you see all these different icons in here. You see the toolbar along the top. So if we want to pick a particular item, like a table or something like that, and maybe we want to check it out, we can do the checkout. When I do that, it'll ask you for things like, do you also want the drawing, which we could also do. And it's going to mark my name as checked out by me. Now in 2013, they added a couple functions here where you could highlight, you hover over the name, it'll tell you the person's name, maybe their phone number. Because the theory is that you would have multiple people working on this assembly. And so you could have 10, 15 names in this list of people working on components of the assembly. So really one of the main benefits of PDM is the whole collaborative side of it. So you can share parts of the design. And that's what the checked out column is there to show you, who's working on it at the moment. The task pane itself, it could be collapsed and resized and things like that. It could be set to auto hide, auto show, that kind of thing. So when you click out of here, it hides itself. It could also be docked from there. So you could take it and drag it off of there. You could drag it onto another monitor. Just a tip for those who want to do that, because we do see some customers will take their task pane, just leave it sitting on another monitor so that they can see the refreshes happening and they don't interfere with their main session, their main window. If you're going to do that, you can't just drag it to the right because it'll dock itself again. So you kind of got to drag it down and around. But when you double click on it, it will put it back embedded into the SolidWorks window. That's a pretty handy feature to be able to take that and move that off the screen, because obviously real estate when you're designing is important, and also having this visible, because it's always refreshing, that's also important. So if you're working on a design and all of a sudden you notice that an icon changes or a status changes in one of these files, sometimes it's important to know that instantly, and if you have it hidden, you don't see it. So sometimes putting it on a separate monitor can be helpful. Or get a third monitor. So as you're working on the design itself, you're also going to see changes in icons. So when going back to SolidWorks, if we look at this design here, we see it's an assembly and it has all the children underneath it. So this is there to show you the active window, the status of the active window. So you see all these little gray, it looks like it's a gray, like a circle with, it's supposed to be equal signs. Tough to see, but take my word for it, it's like an equal sign. And then there's these pencils along the side of there. And as let's say I want to get maybe an older version of this particular design, you're going to see it, changes an icon. I have a red circle with an arrow down, that kind of thing. If I, let's say I take a file and I open it up, you can see that this equal sign here and this pencil is here, kind of it's like a dual icon. So the pencil is there to identify the fact that it's been modified. The equal sign means that it's equal to the vault. So it's modified yet equal to the vault. That's kind of it doesn't really go together. But in this case, what it's saying is the icon is there to represent its status, the file itself on the drive, and its status in comparison to the file in the vault. So if you get an equal sign like this, that means it's the same file. So in theory, another person on another machine would open that same file, they should see the same thing. If you see an equal sign with a pencil, what you're telling the system is you've modified it, but you haven't saved it. So it's there to essentially say there's still some a little breakdown here. So the file is listed as flagged as modified, so you see a little pencil there. But if it's not been saved, it will look like this. Once it is saved, it goes to green. And of course, this can only happen if you have the file checked out. So you can modify a file that's not checked out. It will let you. But in order to save those changes and effectively have a green icon, the file needs to be checked out so that you can actually save it. Once it's saved, you go green. And then that's essentially saying your file is newer than what's in the vault, which in theory would mean it's ready to be checked back in. You can also get a pencil with the green. So if I modify the file and I haven't saved it yet, I'll get a pencil with a green. So it's telling me that there's been an edit since your last save. So once you save everything, the pencils go away, they're green icons, and that's basically saying that design is ready to go back into the vault. So one thing that we teach people is, with SolidWorks, you never know, in some cases, when you open an assembly, what a rebuild can flag as change. So it could take a part way down the list, way down your tree maybe, and just through you doing a rebuild can flag that file as being changed. So the pencils are important because you don't know exactly what changed. Or maybe you change something as simple as a placement of a hole, but there's another hole that's driven by that in another part. That part's flagged as changed. But if you don't check it out and essentially make it so it gets the green circle, those changes are thrown away. So the next person that opens it may get a slightly different result because you, through your rebuild and your pencil, you've edited the file. So what you print, what you view in the drawing is the edited version. What the next person opens may be slightly different. Yes?
If someone's working on one of the other parts and they save it to the vault,
Mm-hmm.
does it notify this window that it's been changed, or do you have to check out the assembly first in order to find out that the part's been changed?
So what you end up getting is you'll get basically two messages. So in this window, so if presumably you have this window open, the first thing you'll notice is that the user will say, it'll say checked out by that user's name. That's like the first clue. Once they check it back in, but not until, once it gets checked in, your session will turn this color. And you'll get a red dot, and that's telling you you should go get the latest and bring it in.
Yeah, and that happens automatically. You don't have to refresh yours for reading.
Yeah, it's within, there's a constant refresh going on.
Okay.
And so it'll happen maybe 20 seconds. It'll redo itself. Mm-hmm.
Yesterday I was told there's a setting that you can click and put always use latest version.
Mm-hmm.
How does that affect you? And when does it come into play? Does it just show up or does it automatically load the latest part?
Well, the latest version option really, it changes, what it's there for is to change your menu and how you get the files. So one of the options here in this window is if I want to, let's say, get an older version, I can say, get me version 1 or get me version 3. If you turn on that option, it takes away your ability to get history. It doesn't necessarily mean that SolidWorks assembly has been built with all the latest. It just means your menus are trimmed down to keep you from looking at history. So in my case here with this file, and it doesn't have to be a structure, it's going to do it on a single file, single drawing. The status is important. So this file is checked out by me. If I just want to simply save it, now I get a green circle. So I mean, as simple as just doing the save. That's all you need to do. Inside of here, you're going to see those combination of icons. We have some grays that are marked as pencils, some greens, and some reds. If you ever see an icon that looks like this one on the bottom, what that's telling you is that the file is not considered a vaulted file. So in SolidWorks, we're pretty free to assemble components from wherever we want. I could assemble a component from the vault, and then I could insert another component from some folder on my desktop. But in the tree, you'll see that folder that you assembled from your desktop will have a blue icon. And that's telling you that when you check this into the vault, that file's not going with it. So what you lose there, if you have these blue circled objects in your tree, is it does not construct a bill of material using those objects then. So the next person that opens that up is going to be missing that piece because it's sitting on your hard drive. So that's a very important thing to recognize, is that blue circle.
Doesn't it grab all those parts and ask you to want to check them in when you check in yourself?
It does not.
Manually check them in yourself.
There is a reference tool that you can tell it, go find all my outside the vault files and bring them in, but not in the context of just a check-in. So it's a separate action you would have to do. Mm-hmm.
Is there a way to set it to automatically update your local, folder for any parts that have been updated? Because I know we had guys who just pay attention to it, and they'll be working 3 or 4 versions behind, and there's just not that person who keeps an eye on it. So we find a lot of issues with that, and he's definitely not gonna. I mean, I know we can update our whole folder, but it takes a while. So can we schedule it middle of the night or something?
Generally what we try to do is we don't generally try to update them by forcing the updates to the PC. What we do is we'll force the clearing of it. So we can schedule things like a clearing, and I'll actually get to some of that in a little bit, but that's one of the core issues that we see a lot of SolidWorks users have as they're using the Vault for the first time. So one thing to also recognize when you're using the Vault is, you have this green icon, you have this pencil in there, and again, you can have a green in combination with a pencil if it's been modified since your last save. Also, there's an important column in here called the version. So as you're modifying the file, like I was saying before, you count up the version. So it starts at 1 and it goes to 100. Each time you do this versioning, at least most cases, you're going to take another copy of the file and you're going to put it in your server. So you could have 100 different versions of this at your server. So most likely when you look at a file, you're going to see a number on one side and a number on the other. The number on the right side of the slash represent what's available. What's the latest? So is it version 10, 20, 50? And then the number on the left side of the slash is there to tell you what version you're looking at. If it's a dash, that means the version that you have that you're looking at does not match anything that's in the vault. So generally that means it's been saved, it's newer. So when you see a --7, like in this case, that doesn't mean it's bad. That means the version you have doesn't match the latest version in the vault, simply because you've changed it and saved it. And it recognizes that based on time, date, stamps, and that kind of thing. There's also other columns that you can put in here. What's commonly delivered when you just do a base install is it puts in things like the version, description, I think, just workflow status, checked out by column, and it adds those into the task pane for you. So you see if I scroll across these different columns here, there's version, description, workflow state, checked out by. And one thing that's kind of handy is this thing called the quick child info. So what we find is, let's say somebody has opened up a big assembly that has a lot of sub-assemblies. This can provide some feedback as to the status of files under an assembly. So this assembly on its own is not out of date. But this is indicating that somewhere in the assembly there's an out-of-date part. So without scrolling through, let's say this whole thing if you had a sub-assembly and there's ability to collapse it so you don't see the whole exploded sub-assembly, but you will see the quick child info on that assembly to let you know that in there somewhere is a part that's out of date. And obviously having an out-of-date part could be very bad in some cases. Some cases it's what you want, but in other cases you want to have all the latest. This is your visual indicator. Of course, all of this is refreshing all the time. It is real time with a slight delay. So it's not just constantly, like every second, pinging the server. It's maybe every 20 seconds or so. You're getting a server refresh. And that server refresh refreshes your SolidWorks tree. It also is refreshing your Vault view itself. So inside of, let's say I have this library here, and this is where all my files are. This view is also being refreshed every 20, 30 seconds by a process that's running on your machine. And it also checks for things like, do you have a license and stuff like that, periodically. So it's important you stay connected to the network. Otherwise, that stops working. It also refreshes in anytime you do some kind of major operation. Insert a new component, suppress, unsuppress, rebuild. So there's a list of things that you can select to you can unselect to not force a reload so often. And I'll show you some of that too. That's essentially what triggers the whole refresh of this view. Also, you can also refresh it anytime you want. Just right-click in there and refresh. The preview that's down below, it also has some information in here as well. Go through that next. So the preview itself is just a thumbnail of the particular file or drawing or whatever you're looking at. It shows you the last snapshot that was taken during that save, during that version. And so if you do go back a version in the tree, it will show you a different looking view. It also contains some properties, and we can change some of this, and I'm going to go through that. It shows some properties about the file that you've selected, like its workflow state, its revision, its version, stuff like that. And that's what you see in this window down here. So as we click on different things, it'll show you the differences. So if I open up, I think I have another part in here that's a little bit more visually different here. Let me just sort on what I changed today. Is it this part? Oh, this is the one I just changed. Okay. I didn't want to do feature recognition, actually. Close that down. So this, let me go and look at a couple parts here. Also, from a versioning standpoint, the information can be accessed in the preview as well. This preview is essentially the same as SolidWorks. What you have open is reflected by the version that you're looking at. So you can toggle the versions back and forth. And one thing to keep in mind is that the file that you ask for as a version, let's say you're looking at version 5 of 10, it takes the whole file and brings it to your PC. So it's not like it's each time you version it's saving some incremental little snapshot. It actually saves the whole physical file, and a copy of that the whole SolidWorks file is sitting on the server. So if your SolidWorks model is 10 meg, you could very easily get to 100 meg in your server very quickly. Each version is creating a snapshot of that entire file and leaving it on the server as like a standalone file. So let me get to, like in the case of this end cap, you can see there's if I'm looking at a certain version here, the get latest version command that's in Explorer. So I see one with a hole in it. If I go back to previous version, it shows without the hole. That same interaction is in SolidWorks as well. And then that's also going to show you that in the preview. So it's going to come through. Yes?
Is there a tool to compare the versions? If you look at, say, version 6 to 7, like overlay, compare the two?
There is in SolidWorks. It's the compare function. It's part of SolidWorks, but it has with the integration in EPDM, it allows you to compare versions. So, and I can show you this maybe at the end, but it's basically, If you do have EPDM, it allows you to pick a particular version. Like in a lot of cases, when you run that compare without PDM, you have to pick 2 separate files. So you have to go pick a file in this folder and a file in this folder and compare them. And that compare function is just built into SolidWorks, I think Professional. I think it's built in as one of the tools. But with you have EPDM, instead of picking 2 separate files from 2 locations, it allows you to toggle, I want to compare versions or revisions, and it lets you pick history from the same file name. And it will load them in and show you visual differences between the surfaces and properties and other things. Drawings, there also is a drawing compare, but they have not built the integration into EPDM yet. So in that particular case, you have to take the drawing and kind of make a backup out of the vault for each version and then compare them. So they haven't built, so there's a lot of different menus in SolidWorks, and where it makes sense for PDM, they've added in like the integrations, but they haven't gotten to all of them yet, and drawing compare is one of those.
The Explorer integration, you know, the file open window within there, and then you can switch versions inside of the file open window.
Yeah.
And so it's really still there.
It's the versions are there. However, the compare function doesn't really have that built in yet, and I can go through that a little bit at the end and show you how that works. Also, if you kind of take a little tour around the SolidWorks session, you're going to see an Enterprise PDM menu along the top. This is basically showing you operations, the common operations that are available to you that it essentially is based on the item you're selecting in the screen. So if we don't have anything open, if I do a checkout, if I'm not selecting anything on the screen, a checkout will check out whatever's on the screen. If I'm in an assembly and I pick a part, when I hit checkout, it'll check out that part that I picked. So it'll change based on what I'm selecting, even if I'm not selecting anything. So your common functions are here, your get latest version, your get, checkout, check-in, undo, which is nice. Replace toolbox parts, essentially that operation is there to resync the toolbox part that maybe you opened with your actual toolbox. So if you get an assembly from a vendor, something like that, it has a reference to a toolbox part, it can synchronize with your library using this function. And also what's different with toolboxes, you can put it in EPDM as well. I don't know if everybody does that, but it's certainly a good way to keep your toolbox synchronized with various sites if you have different locations. The properties will open up your data card, and then we'll be going through some options as well. So that menu is along the top up here. Again, if I do a check out up here or check in, because my assembly is already checked out. So right now it's looking at my assembly. If I pick a particular part, it's now referencing that part. So it's context sensitive. But we have seen people kind of get in a little bit of trouble because they just get in a habit up here of going up here, I want to check it out, not realizing that they had accidentally selected a part and they're checking out a part instead. So that's just something to keep in mind. The properties is the data card. So that's the card that shows you all the custom properties for the file. This card, for those who are new to EPDM or maybe just getting started with it, this is a card that's configured for your company basically. And so they choose what variables go on there, and then these map into your custom properties if you want them to. If we look at the options, one thing to keep in mind is, when you open up the options, they're basically yours to change as a user. And so, if your company allows it, I guess. But as a user, you can come in and change some of the things maybe that you don't like. Maybe it's a color scheme. Maybe you want some more columns up there to show with your drawings. It could be a lot of different things. So I'm going to go through how those options work and how to change them, and also talking about some things that maybe you don't want to change. So one of the things they added a few releases ago is are a couple flags. So when you open up a file, it used to just say the file's read-only. Do you want to continue? And you'd say yes, and then you'd have to check the file out. A couple releases ago, they added this automation so that when you open up a file, it recognizes that it's not checked out and asks you, do you want to check it out on the fly? That can be turned off. So if you're kind of annoyed by that message, it's not in the SolidWorks options, it's in the EPDM options. You come in here and you can uncheck that, and it will not give you that message when you open up your files.
What part of the options based on users' security options or in the entity?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
Where are the options? Where is the options?
I'll show you that. It's actually under the Enterprise PDM menu, the options area. So, and what it brings up this box, and we have seen some users want to shy away from it because it has this word called server, and they think, whoa, wait a second, if I click this, am I going to shut off everybody? And so they just kind of ignore this whole menu. It says server, but it's really not the server. It's it's your user settings. There are some server level settings here, but you don't have to worry about that unless you're an admin. It doesn't let you change those anyway. It grays them out. So, a couple more things to reference. Showing a warning if you're modifying a checked-in file. So if you do, let's say you want to edit a sketch and the file's not checked out, it'll bring up a box and say, are you sure this file's not checked out? So in order to apply the changes, you'll have to check it out. Kind of gives you that warning. That's what this warning looks like. This is what the warning will say if the file is not checked out already. When you open it, it'll ask you. But again, you can turn those off. This menu here, the show file data card when the new file is saved, when you put a new file into the vault, a card will pop up, and so you can fill in description and things like that. It will also default to the configuration that's active when you're saving the file. If you don't want it to, and you want to default it to the at tab, and the at tab represents the custom properties. So when I look at my properties here, we see an at tab and we see default. Default is of course the configuration name. The at tab represents the custom properties, not the configuration specific properties. And so we see a lot of customers want to use the custom properties as the basis of collecting the information, not config specific. Some like to use config specific as well, so it's really up to you. But this is a way to default it so that when it first comes up, you don't accidentally write the properties into the config when you meant to write them to the custom properties. That's what that at tab is there to represent. And then the last thing here is the task pane, the ability to show it. And it's really, this command here controls placement as well of the task pane. So, or the extra tree pane, I guess it's called. So this location over here on the right, if you don't like it there, you can change it. So let's go up and look at the options menu. So here's the different options we just talked about. Prompt to check out if it's a read-only file, that kind of thing. The show extra tree pane. We go here, we could say top feature manager tree, and it's going to drop it into the top feature manager tree. So it's gone from this menu, and now it's over here. Right there. So now you can put it over here with your, with your feature tree. I didn't even know there was a top feature manager tree until I, did this, change this menu. So you can also put it in the bottom one, or you can hide it altogether if you don't want to even see it. I would not recommend hiding it altogether because, as we talked about, it's very important to see that status in as real time as possible. And one of the reasons I mention this is because we've gone into, like I'm saying, one of the things that we do is we'll go back and talk to customers 3 months after they've implemented, or 6 months, and or maybe it's during an upgrade, and I'll say, well, let's do a quick test. Just bring up your task pane, and I'll get a blank stare. So for 3 months, 6 months, or however long the user's been using EPDM and SolidWorks, they've never seen the task pane. Because inherently, like I was saying, when you're designing, you open up SolidWorks the day after your EPDM launch. You're not worried about EPDM, you're there to design. And so maybe you don't look around at all the new little icons that are sitting on the side of your screen. Especially since we find not a ton of people go over here and dig around. Because in many ways, it's kind of like you're looking for new things. And so in many ways, you're there to do your job, not hunting around for cool things in SolidWorks. So it's easy to overlook, especially since it's a little tiny icon that's sitting most likely over here to the right. Let me go ahead and change that back. You can put it back over on the task pane. And that's going to drop it back over here. A couple other options. So I won't spend a ton of time on this, but there's some refresh options. When you guys had a question on how often the refresh or how does it refresh, so it's going to refresh on its own just every so often. It's syncing back with the server, like I was saying. You can also it'll force a refresh on different operations, and here's the list of those. And let's say you don't want it to do that, you can come in here and uncheck. Really, the only reason to do this is for performance. Because we have seen, let's say, you're in, maybe you're working as a contractor and you're remote, or you're traveling for work and you're still working on a SolidWorks design that's back in the office. Maybe you're working over a VPN connection or something like that. So you have this big assembly open, and every 30 seconds or every time you insert a new component or rebuild or something, it's like refreshing this tree and trying to retrieve this information from a server that's maybe halfway around the world. That may be a lot of traffic that you have to wait for. So you can uncheck these and it will turn off the amount of refresh. So you could say, when I check it out, I don't want to refresh. I know the refresh is not important right now at this minute, so I'll uncheck these. And it will then reduce the amount of refresh time, or the times that it actually does call for that whole refresh of the tree. We don't see this used very often, only in conditions where the assemblies are very large and the connection is poor. So that's something to keep in mind. This area down below, the serial numbers, this is where we can trigger, every time you hit new on a SolidWorks part or save as on a SolidWorks part, it'll get you a new part number. This is not something you can change. An admin can change it. A user cannot. So it'll be grayed out, but it is in this options menu. The next tab over is the view setting tab. And this essentially is just controlling your task pane and what it looks like. So things like using arrow buttons to go to the next file in the tree. So, hitting a down arrow or whatever, or an arrow button. And then instances of parts, instances of assembly. One of the things that we see people changing a lot is this, the column display. Now this can be a little bit of a confusing box here. But basically it's there for you to pick the variable to show in the tree in the task pane. So one thing to keep in mind is that with the data card, these properties are represented in the system as what we call variables. So you write the data into that variable, and then you choose how to display the variable. In our case on the card, we display description in this little box. In the case of the task pane, we display description over here in this column. Well, this column is not here by accident. We tell it as options to include description as a column in our tree. The one thing that's important, though, is understanding what variables are out there. Because let's say you have a very large vault and maybe you're doing lots of different things. You may have hundreds of properties. And it's not obvious which ones you would pick. And I'll give you an example here. So we go to View Setting. The file/variable. This is the file name. This is the revision, the version number, and the different columns checked out by that quick child info or child quick info like I was mentioning before. Those are all there and visible in the tree because they're included here in the list. So if I pick it, it's going to show me display in a column of its own and call that column child quick info. If you didn't like that, you could say, CQI, and that would shrink your column down. So that label there, that caption is actually the name of the header of that column. If let's say you want something else in there, like maybe approved by, when I click on approved by, there is no check. So if I say display as a column on its own, it'll add that column to my list. Of course, you would have to know what variable is the one you're looking for. And this variable's name could be very different than how it's labeled on the card. So this says description, but my variable name could be title. So you really will have to work with the administrator to ask them, okay, I see on the data card this property. What is the property name? So I can add it to my column in task pane. Another tip is on the data card in here. When you're looking at a data card, you can use this little help button over here. And you click in the cell and it'll tell you what the name of the variable is. And that's how you can add it to your task pane as well. So by default, it adds a certain few when you first do the install, and then everybody else really has to add their own variables. So if you go to someone else's machine and they have all these columns along there, and you know it looks nice, and you want to duplicate that, you have to do that as a user setting. So you have to essentially do that manually to add that.
There's no way to deploy that to the masses. Set it once and save it as a preference and roll it out to everybody so you have a consistent look. That would be pretty helpful.
To some degree you can, because it's in the registry. However, it's not the same. They haven't built these kind of settings into the SolidWorks settings wizard. You know how, like in SolidWorks, you can deploy, you can run that. So we have seen people put a reg update in their like SolidWorks launch script, so it keeps updating that. So this is in there. It's not in one place, I don't believe, and it's a little bit complicated to figure out. So, but you can do it. So I'll be waiting for when they can add that to the settings wizard and kind of make that as part of what we could do in using an admin image rollout using the conventional SolidWorks settings wizard, which a lot of people are familiar with. One of the things too is displaying it as part of the file name column. So maybe you don't want to have a separate column and have to scroll over. You can include that as a variable in the file names column itself. So if I go back to SolidWorks and scroll over here to the file name, you see the file's name, you see a version 5/5, the admin's name and default. That's because I've chosen to show these different properties here as part of the file's name. So you could take that stuff off of there and maybe put description, and you could put description in brackets. So that's what this options is there to show you. So I can come over here and I can say, give me approved by, but don't display it as a column. I want you to display it as part of the file name, and I want you to put it in this open arrow, closed arrow kind of structure, and it'll add that to your file name column or into the file name itself. So we actually see a lot of people doing that, where they'll take a lot of their key properties, put them part of the file name, and just turn off the columns, and then they can keep this window kind of shrunk down. You can trim it down a little bit if you're not showing the columns. Also, as a user setting, it's a color scheme essentially for the icons. So we went through what the different icons mean, out of date part, things like that. There's a legend that's actually in here. So if you don't remember what the green circle means, you can come in here and it'll tell you. You can also change the color of it. So if the default color is not what you want a little bit different color, you can change it. And that's why mine is yellow over here. It's all controlled by my options, view setting. Here's the different icons and what they mean. You can turn them off if you don't want to, if you don't want to see them. I'm not sure why people would do that, because it's really helpful to have that color, that icon there. And then you can also edit the different colors. So if you do want yellow or green or red or something like that, you could do it. And I see some people actually will do it the opposite way. So if it's equal, they'll color this tree and then take the color off when it's different or when it's out of date. So it just depends on what's visually recognizable to you, what's going to give you the visual feedback that you need. So also built into the SolidWorks integration are integrations into the menus themselves. And like I was saying before, when you don't have anything highlighted, you can use that Enterprise PDM menu along the top to just check out a file or look at its properties. You can also do, there's interaction in the tree, in the task pane. When you're clicking on the part, when you right click, you're going to have the menus there. And you have the common commands in there like get version, that kind of thing. So in virtually anything that you're highlighting, if you right click, you're going to get that option. So from this assembly or from a part, if I right click, I have a get version, get, check in, undo, check out, and properties. It's these key set of menus. We're also going to have it over here. So when I click on this, you got it there too. Over here, same difference. Right click, you have your key functions. So what this allows you to do is, if you're working on a design, you could come in here and you could basically say, well, let me get an older version of this, and you could go back to a previous version of it. So you can just swap that right out of the vault. So you could be, you could have a large assembly and you could be working in a little tiny area, and so you don't have to know which part is what because it's highlighting everywhere. So if it's highlighting here, it's highlighting here. If you click on it here, it's highlighting here and highlighting here and highlighting over here. So if you don't know the part number, you just click on the part and it'll take you there. Obviously in SolidWorks it's going to take you there, but also here as well. Because sometimes people they'll name their file a certain thing. So the file might be called bracket or something. The part number might be a property in PDM that you see on the data card. So if you want to know that, you can also right click and go to properties right here on the file and you find your part number, let's say. So that right click menu is available basically anytime you're selecting something. There's also ways to do shortcuts, and I know a lot of SolidWorks users will do a lot of shortcuts with their feature creation or whatever, maybe the view display or orientation, just ways to quickly get the model in a position that where you're working. You can also use those same kind of shortcuts for things like EPDM commands. So when they have some basic commands in there, the get version, get, check out, check in, undo. It's basically the menus that we've gone through a couple times, but it's that core set of menus. You can also hook those onto an F1 and F2, stuff like that. Again, it's context sensitive. So if you're picking on a part and you hit F2, it'll check in that part, not the assembly. So you do have to be aware of what you're selecting. And then on the mouse gesture side, you can also tie in mouse gestures to this as well. And these menus are all in the customize. So for those who've gone in and customized their SolidWorks options, if you go into, let's say, keyboard, there's all commands up here, and you may have gone and picked the commands that you were interested in, but didn't realize if you hit drop down up here, you can go Enterprise PDM, and it shows you these menus, and you can say, Control L is get latest version, or whatever the case is. So the data card we see, that's one of the most popular ones. So let's say, I'm just sitting here, I can do a Control D to bring up the card. So because the card is something, if you're going to do some edit, some people have very large cards and have, 30, 40, 50, 100 properties that they can update because they treat it as a library. And so accessing that quickly is key. So the next part of the presentation is really the challenges. And so, going over the integration, maybe a lot of you that are users have seen and used the integration and kind of understand the menus. This is really taking it to the next level and really understanding how the system works when you're modifying files. This is probably one of the biggest challenges. And so if you're, let's say, a SolidWorks user that's new to EPDM, or maybe you're an administrator, that's looking to get their, the team educated, this is one of the things that SolidWorks users will struggle with, and sometimes struggle for quite some time. So understanding these basics is pretty key. So really the hardest part of managing the SolidWorks files are these three pieces. It's the versions, and we kind of brought that up a little bit. It's understanding the concepts of saving this history. Because if you've been working on a network drive with SolidWorks for years, to update your SolidWorks file on the network drive, you just hit save. You don't have to worry about anything else. Now, PDM comes into play, and the save is not quite good enough. In order for you to take it, put it back in the vault, and essentially create that version, you need to do a check-in. So it's a new process that comes into play, and also you have to be aware of what you're working on, because now you could be working on older files or looking at newer files, and then other people in the facility have to also know what to look at as well. So the versions poses an interesting challenge. The fact that the versions are linked together, that's its own challenge. And then you have this thing called the cache, which is what you're essentially managing locally, and that has to be in line with your versions and your version links. So we're going to go through that so I can show you how you can get into trouble and how you can get out of trouble and what to look for. But really from a SolidWorks perspective, if you're going to be successful with SolidWorks and EPDM together as a user, you have to understand these things. And as an administrator, it's important to quiz your users or check your users to make sure they understand these concepts. And what we've been doing over the past couple years is really trying to reinforce this in the training. However, the training itself is generally not enough, and when people are using it for the first time, having this fundamental knowledge is very important if you're trying to mentor them, if you're maybe a super user or an administrator. So a few things, the versions, the version links, and the cache. What we see in some cases, if you look at a tab called the Contains tab, it shows you all your references in an assembly. When you know you're a little bit in trouble as a user is when you see things like bold numbers in your Contains tab. The bold number means that we're looking at, let's say in this assembly, we're looking at version 7 of the assembly. That assembly has version 7 of 8 of this child. That assembly has version 5 of 6 of its child. So that means there's a version 6 out there that's not in your assembly, and there's a version 8 of this assembly that's not in this assembly. So essentially what you've done here, if you built a menu that looks like this, or built an assembly that has this kind of look, is you potentially have an out-of-date assembly. So what is essentially this Contains tab and this look could be a check for you to really understand, am I looking at the latest? And we'll kind of go through some of the things that you're going to listen for from an administrator standpoint and from a user standpoint. So also issues with the cache itself. So let me explain a little bit on the cache. The cache is something that from a user perspective are the files that are local on your PC. So Enterprise PDM is a server client type of system. There's a bunch of files on a server, and there's some files on your client. When you're opening the files in SolidWorks, or when you're viewing them, or when you're printing them, or whatever the case is, those operations are done locally. The file copies from the server to your PC. The challenge is when you're looking at, let's say, a drawing or part or whatever it is, there's multiple versions of the history. And so the system is set up so that it's not going to go out to the server and assume you want the latest of everything you've ever looked at, or your drive would be so full of everything from the vault that you'd run out of space on your PC. So what you've looked at in the past, it's going to assume that's what you want to leave there because you've made a decision to leave it there. So to fill your cache, you're basically viewing things. To clear your cache, you have to use a function called a clear local cache, and that'll remove the file from your PC. So these files that are here in this list are not local on my PC necessarily. They're only local. If I pick on it and I see this thing says version 4 of 4, if I click here, it says version, I guess 4. If I click up here, I get version 4 of 5. This tells me that in my cache is version 4. What's available is version 5. Here's where it gets tricky though. If I open this in SolidWorks, I'm opening version 4. It assumes I'm opening it because I want to look at the history. So if you have access to the history, you have to know that you're opening the history. What you could also do, accidentally, is assemble this version 4 into your assembly. And essentially you're building an assembly with history. But in some cases that's what people want, so there's no real way for it to understand what your intent is. So what I've told users over the years is, as complex as EPDM could be, the most complicated part is this tab that you have no control over. So this tab, there's nothing on here. There's lots on the data card. There's a bill of material tab. You can look at the bill. There's lots of things to learn. And they gloss over the version. There's nothing here. The version tab is the most important tab on this whole screen because that's telling you what you're looking at, what you're working on. If you do check out a file, it will by default get you the latest. But if you're just assembling it to something or just printing it, this tab has to be your friend, and your eyes have to be trained to say, when I click on a file, what is my version? So that really does become key. And understanding what's in your cache is also very important. So this file is in my cache, version 4 of 4. Version 4 of 4. And let me bring up a couple more files here. Let me just sort there. So in this, let's say this in cap, I'm looking at version 6 of 6 there. That's this particular file. If, let's say I wanted to look at an older version, I could go get that older version, let's say A. It'll also get the drawing. Maybe I won't get the drawing in that case. So here you see it doesn't have that hole in the middle. But this might have been the way I released it at Rev A. And I just moved about my business, worked on another project, but in the meantime somebody else changed it a couple times. Now when I come back in a few days, I'm going to see version 4 of 6 or 5 of 6. So the system doesn't know to go replace yours. So you'll only really be sure as a user is just keep your cache clear. And then next time you go get it, it's going to get you the latest. So if you keep your cache somewhat trimmed down and remember to clear it, that can help you to some degree with this kind of issue. Well, when you check it out, it's going to get you the latest anyway. So if it's 4 of 6 and I'm looking at it and I do a checkout command, it'll get me 6 of 6.
The likelihood of you building an assembly on 4 of 6 and not be able to make any kind of reference to it, which of course the check them is kind of slim. Because you can't mate it.
Yeah, you can mate without changing the model. You couldn't do reference geometry. You couldn't edit the file without it checked out. However, you could assemble it or something like that. Yeah. And generally, yeah, go ahead.
As it relates to folks that are like in an R&D environment, where you're working on a part, you may never make an assembly of it, but you're working on a part, you're tweaking it, maybe doing some FEA on it, tweaking it. How do you manage because there's a fine line between making a new revision of it versus just maintaining it, making those small tweaks and versioning it. So what do you recommend in terms of best practices?
Well, from an R&D standpoint, it's going to store the history, and the history, unless you release it, let's say, or unless you have your file moving along a workflow, it's just going to version it. So the revisioning side is not something you have to worry about until you make that choice of moving it along its workflow. And you may have instances where the state of the file is in maybe a concept or some kind of mode until you move it to production. You may have a lot of files that never make it to production. So all those iterations are stored as versions. What we do find is it's a challenge sometimes when you're doing a lot of iterations. Your Rev A might have 60 versions. And so what we've seen is some people will just, once they get to a version where they're ready to release it, they'll just copy it as a new file and archive that history or blow it away or something, and then they start version 1 as my new file.
What about like configurations though? It seems like you could take a file and if you're tweaking it, it can make a configuration of the tweak. Is it better to do that or to, essentially make a new version?
Well, you're versioning it anyway, because you have to check it out to add a configuration. I'm not a huge fan of doing configurations as design concepts. I'd rather see you doing it as versions. And then when you have that history, let's say 20 versions, and you get to a point where, one of those 20 you want to release, you could check out the file and go get the version you want and bring that forward as the one that you're going to use. And then you release that one.
Just to add to this point, like I do operations like this on R&D for projects that I do, and when he says check in, check out, that doesn't mean close the file. I'll be working on a file, check in, check out, just to get a version, just check it in and out again, and just keep going. So it's not like you're held to you have to do so much to do a version, or you have to wait till you're done and closing the program and check it back in. It's an on-the-fly thing with the task plan on the side. You can say, okay, I've done an hour's worth, let me check it in because I feel like it, get a new version, check it right back out, and then you got that, just keep going. You can add notes to all of these check-ins. There's an option where you can put, I did this, go in the next iteration on that version, and it'll just see that. So like when he had his version list up there, you can see all those notes on the side that link to those version numbers.
Okay.
Give it a saving to your shared record. Just now you have a history of every single time you ship it.
So a couple more things on the caching. What we can tend to see are instances like this, where a drawing, when you're looking at it in e-drawings or looking in the preview, you may look at it a certain way. But if you open it in SolidWorks and you get a different design, so your drawing looks different. Generally that's there because of a caching issue. So something that's not cached correctly. So when I open it, when I look at it in the preview, it's going to show me how it was last saved. When I open it up in SolidWorks, it's going to essentially rebuild that on the fly. So if you have version 4 of 6 in your cache, when you open the drawing is going to be rebuilt with version 4 of 6 of the model. So effectively, it looks like a model or a drawing you did 2 years ago. And you just think, oh, I lost all my changes. And we get lots of calls like this into our support desk. Say, well, I opened it fine on my PC. Somebody else opened it. It looks bad on their PC. What happened? Generally, and I would say 9 times out of 10, but it's probably higher ratio. So we got to go into the hundreds. 99 out of 100, it's a caching issue. It's somebody not having the proper file in their cache. So if you see something like yesterday it looked like this, today it looks like this. The version of the assembly didn't change, so how could the assembly look different? It's Rev A in both cases. Well, if you open it in SolidWorks, it rebuilds in SolidWorks, and therefore it can change based on the parts that you have in your cache. So sometimes what we see to get around this, and we see that, and this is kind of, in a way, a little bit of a bad habit. So if let's say I'm working on a project, and I'm working on this design, there's 50 parts in here, and every day, or maybe every night, I check in the files, or periodically when I go in this folder, what I do is I just get everything that it's latest. So I'll take the whole folder and highlight every file in here and say, get latest version. Now that will get me the latest of everything. However, what it's not doing is showing you what's referenced in your assembly. So it's important not only know the version that's in your cache, but the version your assembly expects to have. Because the last time you released that assembly, let's say a couple of the parts have been changed 5 times, but maybe they're just concepts, and you don't want them in your assembly when you're printing out a drawing for production. So that's important to know as well, is not only what's in your cache, but what your assembly wants in your cache, what the drawing wants in the cache. And that has to do with when you last saved the drawing, or checked it in, or released it.
Doesn't that get a little tricky if you want people, say, in manufacturing, you only see the latest released version, which might be version 5, Rev A. You want your engineering staff to be able to see the latest version, which
Yeah, it can, based on your security, you can say for a shop user, only see released files. And when they go and look at the release file, their version tab would be out of date because there's a couple more available that they can't see. And that's okay. For the engineer, they would see all the history.
So they won't even have the option to get latest, or when you run get latest, will it get?
It gets their latest, basically. What's latest approved for them to see, which is controlled by the permissions of the workflow as well as the folder permissions and things. From a user perspective, though, what they have to understand when, let's say a guy from the shop comes in and says, hey, my PC's busted, I need a print. Can you print this out for me? It's important to know when you look at it that maybe you want to get not the latest of everything, but the latest that they're looking, so all the parts that were there when that assembly was released into production. So, when you hear things like this, that looks different than SolidWorks, why is my task pane red, things like that. So if you open up an assembly and you have all those red circles along the side in your task pane, that generally means that you're looking at out-of-date parts, or it does mean that. Look good on my PC. We hear that one a lot. And one of the reasons why I bring this up is that you think about these are the kind of things I guess to listen for. So if you're maybe a power user in a group or an administrator, and somebody comes up and says, Joe printed it out and it looked good, and then I'm looking at it today and it looks like an old design, so we must have lost data. So before you go scrambling to restore data, just look at the cache and see what's in their cache. And as long as the caches match, they should match. If they don't match, then that's when you call us up and say, we got a problem here with this file or something like that. But we've not really had that instance happen yet. Normally it's because the cache looks different from one PC to the next.
And why would you not just clear your cache as a good habit every day at the end of the day after you check things in?
Well, that is it's a good habit to clear your cache. Sometimes people, because of their maybe their speed of their network or whatever, they may say, you know what, I'm going to clear my cache only when I'm done with the project. And if there's 20 people working on the project, you could get files updating in your cache all day that are updating into the system all day, but you're not updating your cache necessarily all day. So it's just a personal choice because generally speaking, if I have, let's say my network is not great and I have an assembly that's 700 meg and 3,000 parts, I may not want to try and get that every day because that's copying it across to my local PC. So I may only want to clear it when I'm totally done.
But if you have a great network connection, you can play everywhere, how often do you do that?
Generally, I would clear it. It's really something that you want to clear, I think, it's when you're done with projects. So, because there's no point in just recapturing everything. It does depend on how interactive the project or how collaborative the project is. So, there's a lot of people working on it. Maybe you want to clear it and get. But you shouldn't really have any problems as long as you're aware of these different icons and you keep that visible. So, there's a lot of, I guess, signs to tell you that you're out of date, as long as you know where they are. And once you have your eyes trained to look at that, it's something that once you form that habit, you shouldn't have any of these other issues. Because right here, this is telling me I need to cache 2 files. I don't need to go and just clear my cache every day and bring all the files back. When I open it in SolidWorks, it's telling me there's 2 files that are out of date. You better go get those. So, or you can choose to not get them. It's just that choice at that minute.
When you're talking about caching, what is the best method for caching out the PPM stuff? Is it separate from all your temporary files on your PC or workstation, all that? Because I do a CC cleaner type of cache clean out every night or every other night. Am I technically catching all the EPDM stuff as well, or is that kind of held separate in Windows from all your temporary files?
Well, your cache is not in your temporary files. It's essentially on your PC in the same location as your vault, which kind of makes it a little bit more complicated. So any kind of caching tool where it cleans up your temporary files, or maybe clearing up program files or internet files, but it will not clear your cache. It stays there. The cache is essentially stored. So in my case, I have a vault view under my C drive called EPDM Vault. That folder really exists under C. That's your cache. So I might have 10,000 files in my vault, but if I only have 3 cached, if I go through and kind of go into the vault view from a C, maybe not everybody should do this, but you can go kind of behind the scenes, you'll only see 3 files locally. But while you're in Windows and this integration is turned on, you can't browse into there. I mean, you can't right-click and go and look at the cache. It's hidden because it's not something you're supposed to have to worry about. So when you go in there, your folders obviously are green for your EPDM users, and then essentially by clicking on a file, it brings it local into my cache, and then pops into that area that you can do a directory listing on if you wanted to see what's in the cache.
How would you suggest clearing?
So if you wanted to do it programmatically, so every day when you shut down your PC or when you boot up, you wanted to clear the cache, you can use a batch routine. And I think maybe we even have it on our website, but I can give you a sample. But essentially you can run a batch routine that does basically a DOS level delete of the files. And as long as you only remove read-only files out of your cache, you'll never get rid of a file that someone has checked out. As a user, you do it at the folder level. So you could pick a folder, and you go up to Tools and say Clear Local Cache. That will not delete anything that you have checked out. It only deletes from your local PC what you're essentially not working on. But we have used the programs in some cases to do the auto delete of the cache, especially for shop PCs and stuff. And then we also used it for auto backups. So we'll have maybe a certain group that wants their cache backed up throughout the day. So if they lose a PC, maybe they're working on really critical stuff, you can run the same kind of routine to go into the cache and take the files out that are being worked on and back them up. So, one thing for SolidWorks users, one of the complicated things is really this whole idea of versioning. We talked about that in your version and the version that's in the cache. Not only is that complicated to new users, also the version relationship. So you have a version of an assembly that uses these versions. It's the V1 of this part number. So assume these are part numbers and these are versions. Version 1 has version 1 of all these parts. Okay, this is a very simple assembly with 4 pieces. Pretty simple, right? So let's say you change the assembly and you modified these 2 parts. So this part and this part got a version 2. Version 1 of these 2 parts is still there in the assembly. So now you have, what do we have now? We have these basically 2 extra connections to 2 new versions. Now we go to version 3. In version 3, we're still at version 1 of this. We're at version 2 of this, version 2 of this, version 3 of this one, version 1 of this as a new part, and then version 2 of this one. So this history is not only versioning the part, but there's a relationship between each version that's unique. So you have to know which version of each part that the version of assembly is looking for. And now picture this times 100 parts or 1,000 parts in an assembly, and 60 versions of every single component, assembly, parts, everything else. So when I bring all this up, I bring it up because it's not a simple issue. It can turn into a spider web very quickly. Now, understanding it, just the basics of it, can really help in determining, does my assembly have the latest? But a lot of times it's just basically, if you can say, by looking at an assembly, which version of each part is connected to it, that's usually the first step. And like I was saying, a lot of users, when they're designing and everything else, they're going about their business, working on projects, maybe they're not paying attention to where all these references are and where all these links are. And that's why you can get these trees with out-of-date parts in them. So what I mentioned before up here in this one slide, when you see stuff like this in the tree. And I've seen very good users show me their contains tab, and they will have bold numbers all throughout it just because they're just forgetting to go back and roll that history up so that you have the latest children. There's one thing to keep in mind. If let's say this assembly is a version 6 of 7, it has 6 of 8 of this assembly. Version 7 of 7 has 7 of 8. Maybe what I really want is 8 of 8. But let's say I change this whole assembly, everything looks good, and then I modify a part down in the tree. Well, I have to take that part and apply it to the subassembly that uses that, and then apply that to the top level assembly for all the bold to go away. Because really the goal, if you want to release the latest, is you want to have gray all through your contains. So when if I go into EPDM and pick an assembly, and I go to the Contains tab, this is showing me that my parts are out of date. Now if I go to one level up, this assembly, you see that is down inside the tree as well. So you see these different instances of these out-of-date parts. Now maybe that's what you wanted when you released it, but if it's not, that's a visual cue that you should get this synced up. And so when I modify this part, now it's version 6 is maybe the latest. For me to edit this and get version 6, I have to edit this assembly to bring that 6 in. Verify that that assembly is good, but when I modify that, that's going to get me another version of this assembly, which then has to be carried up to the top level. So it's really a bottom-up approach, or you change everything at once and save it all at once and check it in at once. But if you are changing it throughout, let's say, a given weeks or months, your very last step should be to update the parents of that child's change. So the change of the child, you update the assembly, you update the drawing, update its assembly, update its drawing, so that you get no bold in the tree. That's really the goal if you want to have latest. Let me get back to where I was looking at here. So understanding the cache. So we talked about this a little bit. The cache is where the file is downloaded. And if you do have an out-of-date file in your cache, you're going to look at that version tab. That version tab is going to show a warning sign there. If you do not have the file local at all, you're going to see a red circle with an X. That just means the file's not local. So when you click on it to view, it'll just by default get the latest. But in our case here, if we already have the file local, it assumes that's what you want until you actually send the command, get the latest version. So I would say, as complicated as this whole scenario is, getting used to what version in your cache is probably as, I guess it's probably the most important part, is understanding what's in your cache first. And then once you understand that cache, then you can then start looking at how the files are linked together. So, but understanding really those components will then help when it's time to release files and that kind of thing. So tips to make sure you're using up-to-date references. The most important thing is when you're in SolidWorks, look at your task pane. So have your task pane open, have it open all the time, hold on a separate monitor, whatever it takes to have that refresh showing. If you don't like the task pane showing, when you do every save, just get in the habit of flipping it open and just seeing, did somebody change a part I'm working on? Because if they did, maybe I want that. I can bring it in. Or maybe you'll see, wait a second, somebody just checked out a file that's in my assembly. So I better give them a shout and just see what's going on. So and maybe they could check it in so I could get the latest in my assembly. So a clue is go to your Contains tab and see what's here. The thing about the Contains tab, it does not use the cache at all. It's a report of the last check-in available. So if I go to, let me go back to here. If I look at, let's say, this drawing, when I preview it, that's showing me what's in my cache. When I hit the Contains tab, let's say for an assembly, that's showing me a report of what the server sees. So it's not cache related. Okay. And so what you have here is essentially a nice report so you can run this and just see where you stand. And I better buzz through a few other things here. Also, the reference dialogues. When you check in files, you're going to see bold numbers in the check-in dialogues. So that's telling you that you're checking in a file that's out of date. So, and those are really the two areas. So, Contains tab, Task pane, check-in dialogues. Those are all going to show all these bold symbols everywhere. So if you see these different colored files in the listing, that's your cue that you need to get a latest, or that maybe you have something that's not going to look the same if somebody opens it on their PC. So a couple more things I want to go through before we finish, just some different messages. We've already covered this one, but essentially if you're going to modify a file, it's going to tell you if it's read-only. A couple other ones, the checkout warning, we kind of went through that already as well. One of the things we see sometimes is someone will try to check out a file from Explorer that's already open in SolidWorks. It will give you this kind of message. To me, that's kind of obvious, but it's, some people just don't catch it. And if it's an assembly that has a part and you go to try to check out the part, it's still open in the session of SolidWorks, so it'll give you this message. And if this is a stop sign, it won't let you do anything until you resolve that, which means closing it in SolidWorks.
Can you refresh that file?
Refresh it?
Yeah, at this point, to check out the latest version.
You can get the latest version at any time, yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, from Explorer or whatever. But if it is open in SolidWorks, you want to do your getting versions and checking out from SolidWorks generally.
Okay.
And this is one of the big ones that we see just on a get latest version. So if I have a file checked out, and I've been working on this drawing, let's say, my instinct might be if I come in and I'm like, I want to get the version, so let me just click get latest version. That tells the vault, go get me the latest version in the vault, and then it'll give you this message. That file is currently checked out, do you want to replace it? And if you don't read the message totally or clearly or hit yes to all, that would be terrible, it'll actually go and replace every file that you're working on with the latest from the vault. It's essentially undoing all your work. So anytime you see a message pop up, it's really good to read those. There's not a ton of messages, so it's definitely, you don't want to hit yes to all.
Why would you ever have your users working on an older version of the file?
Well, they might be working, so the file they're working on doesn't match the vault because it's newer than the vault.
But you don't want them modifying 4 or 6 anyway.
No, they wouldn't be doing that. They'd be modifying, in this case, dash of 6. Because their drawing is newer. So it doesn't match the vault in any way. So when I say go get it from the vault, it replaces dash of 6 with 6 of 6, and I just discarded all my changes.
Dash of 6 probably would have been 7 of 6.
Would become 7 of 7 when they put it back in. Right, exactly. This is another goodie, is the file is not rebuilt. This has to do with save order, just so you know. It's not necessarily, we'll see people, they'll open it up and they'll start rebuilding and not changing the message. It really has to do with save order. So this message tells you your part was saved after your assembly was saved. But it's like this terminology is something that's used at SolidWorks. So it's a terminology people are familiar with, so they leave that as the message. So in the Contains tab or the Where Used tab, you'll see this message. This is telling you your assembly, even if they were checked in the same day, even if your assembly has the latest child, if your child was saved after your assembly, by default, you didn't update your assembly. So it gives you this warning flag. That's what that means. A couple just tips. Use File Explorer if you, that's also available in the task pane, and you can browse right into the vault from there. Some integration tips. If you are using SolidWorks, maybe you got a new station. This is the first thing you should change with EPDM. Go into the tools, into the options, and go to and check this box. Don't prompt to save read-only reference documents. If you don't check this box, if I modify a part and I didn't check it out, when I save my assembly, it'll give me a save as box for every single one that's flagged. I mean, you could get 10, 20 different boxes popping up. If you do see those messages come up, the save as, that's what this controls. And I'll try to wrap it up here quickly. A couple other things that are just tips, good to know. You can put shortcuts to templates and searches on your desktop. So you can launch a search without going technically browsing into the vault. So it's something that you can do. And also things like user settings are important to talk with your administrator about as well. So if you're checking out an assembly and you want to by default all the time automatically check all the boxes underneath, or you don't want to have them automatically checked, those kind of options are available. They're in the settings. So, but it does help to sit with your administrator, or as an administrator, go through these settings and just make sure you review all of them so that you can help, that's going to help control your deployment. And library we don't need to go through, and that's pretty much it. So I'm going to try, sorry for wrapping up the last part fast, but then I'm going to hang around for a few minutes if anybody has any questions. So, hey, Joy, thank you.